Hey guys, it's Tyler as always. I want to make a vaguely quick video in response to Crispy on attacks in combat. I think it's a phenomenal video he did. I wanted to elucidate some things, give some visual ideas for how you can describe different sword attacks than just I attack, or even better than I swing my sword at his head, right? In the German and the Italian longsword system, but I'm going to focus on German for this video, we have a number of different techniques that he mentions. They get special names like Krumpau or Schielhau or Zwerghau, and they get all these special names, but we don't speak German, and even if one of us at the table did do the research to learn this, the rest of your table, if you say, I throw a Zwerghau at the approaching knight, nobody's going to know what you're talking about. So, what are other ways that we can describe these same actions so that we don't just get, I swing my sword at his head, I swing my sword at his head, I swing my sword at his head, and the same description when we're trying to get across three different actions, right? Well, pay attention to detail, right? Here, the simple Oberhau, where I'm swinging it just at the head with the true edge, the long edge of my opponent. Now, if you don't know long edge, false edge, and you don't want to mix that up, we can use terms such that it's clear what we're doing here with our body. I'm twisting the sword around with my grip to hit him with the opposite edge in order to catch the opponent's blade on mine more effectively. See, if I just cut here, normally I've got this whole half of my body that an opposing sword could likewise cut me if they're not defending themselves. Whereas, if I turn out to the side first, then strike with the false edge, look at how much less of my body is exposed. It's basically just my shoulder over here, which means whenever I capture that blade, it's that much of a movement as opposed to that much of a movement. So I'm using this for counter striking. Likewise, with the Zwerghau, I throw a horizontal attack at my opponent's temple, capturing his blade on top of mine. Then I'm lined up for a thrust into his face, or drop down into his thigh, or I can wind off. That is a nice German term, winden, winding, the winding off. That one is a term that isn't really artful. It's a sort of general term that we can use in any concept where I've wound up my attack here as I parry, and then I deliver my own Zwerghau to his head in return. Seeing that it doesn't work, I redouble my efforts and throw it again to the other side of his head. That doesn't work, I have the thrust again. Wind off to an Oberhau. Back and forth and back and forth. And in that way, we can launch 2, 3, 4 attacks in rapid succession without ever just saying, I attack, roll d20, roll d6, d8, whatever. Now, Crispy Jr. also mentions half swording. That's this right here. And he mentions, well, is there a German name for it? No, not really. They just sort of say, grab your sword by the midpoint, or grab the end of the blade, or grab the strong or the weak of your blade, or whatever point they're trying to have you grab. And this allows me to get my point much more accurately into different get my point into different spots on the armor. And it also makes my blade much stiffer in the bind, right? When I'm just holding it out here at one point, as soon as my blade makes contact, it flexes a lot, for one thing, and two, the lever is such that I can't resist it from out here. Whereas when I'm out here, I'm shortening the lever a lot. It's a lot easier for me to get this to go exactly where I'm trying to point it, and a lot more difficult for my opponent to parry once it's like this. Obviously, I'm reducing my range, my reach. Now, a problem in a lot of games is that a weapon like this, which is almost as tall as I am, coming up to shoulder height, does not actually give you any reach. In Dungeons and Dragons, wielding this and wielding a dagger, a screwdriver is what I happen to have, you would have the exact same reach. Because you either have reach or you don't. So obviously there's a mechanical problem to be solved here beyond just, well, roleplay it, right? So not all systems are great for recreating this. Now, half swording is a technique that you will mostly see used in armor, though you can use it out of armor. Joachim Meyer is one fencer that shows using this in armor to block. So, for example, an attack's coming towards my head, I can parry it very strongly, especially if I know that he's going to pull back and he's not just going to ride down my sword and hit me in the hand here. And then my point is right in their face. And now they have to defend. But it is a lot higher risk because if we're unarmored, my hand is just hanging out here. And that is something I wanted to talk about. You see, Crispy is highlighting Hemo while showing videos of what's actually Buhart. And one of the things he comments is that, wow, armor really works. And they move on from there. And yeah, armor does really work. And that should be something that you're thinking about, right? Not just from a perspective of you might die, but you might end up with a horribly disfiguring injury if you're not wearing armor, even if it doesn't kill you. You have to remember, the method for nasal reconstruction in plastic surgery is still oftentimes called the Venetian method to this day, from 16th century fencers who would get their noses broken or cut off all the time. It was a method that was developed 500-600 years ago. That's fascinating to me. And this concept would develop into Mincer in Austria in the 1800s and into the early 1900s. That's why you see a lot of German officers covered in scars. And there it becomes a badge of honor. You didn't want to cover that up. You almost wanted to get cut up in Mincer so you could show how manly, how badass you are. So there's two ways of looking about it. It says something about your character. It says something about the culture your character is from, as to how they are fighting out of armor in particular. Now, when we're starting to fight less of, oh, I've got 80 hit points, I can just tank it, and more, I'm not wearing any armor. That's gonna freaking hurt if I get hit by a sword, and I'd rather, keep my beautiful looks at least for a little longer. Now we're starting to think as a character and not merely as a block of hit points. And that's where the mechanics meet with the role play, they intermingle, and we have something that's far greater than the sum of its parts, right? So I think pay attention to his videos. He's going to give you a lot of great tips on how to spice up your role-playing games, how to make your combat less boring. Hopefully I can just give you a couple little specific pointers of how to describe these varying movements. Wrenching, I capture somebody's blade, then they've moved in too close. Maybe I don't want to remove my blade from theirs to cut because they're still putting pressure on me, and then we'll just both be killed, right? I capture and then shove my pommel forward into his face as I'm maintaining blade contact and moving the blade around, pushing his blade aside, then bashing him in the face with my pommel. Or as I parry, I grab both blades over the top. This is something you'll see. I wish I had a partner to demonstrate this, but if you can imagine a blade coming in here, parry after the blade stopped, grabbing over both of them, wrenching downward, and stabbing into the armpit gap or what have you. And yes, that's primarily an armored fighting technique where we can risk grabbing over both of the blades, because if we miss and we get a little glancing graze to the arm or the hand, it's not the end of the world. Probably nothing will happen to us. The fighting techniques change dramatically in and out of armor. So it's something to think about. Think about how you might feel if a sharp, fast piece of steel is headed towards you. Also think about how the fantasy of that all changes things, right? When we have fantasy, does magical healing cure the scars too? Does magical healing exist at all? And though it does, it probably doesn't prevent the pain of the injury in the first place, right? Pain is an incredibly effective motivator, and though it probably won't end a fight, it will influence the actions you take most of the time. Something to think about. Cheers, guys.